Good afternoon, and welcome to the Landscape Conservation Catalyst Fund webinar. My name is Emily Bateson, Network Director, and joining me today is John Peterson, the Catalyst Fund Manager. During this call, we're going to spend about 20 minutes providing an overview of the network and the Catalyst Fund, and the remaining time will be dedicated to responding to any questions you may have. We'll start with a series of questions submitted by the regular registration process before turning to questions submitted during the webinar itself. To submit questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A icon on your webinar toolbar. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the chat icon to direct questions to John, who will attempt to promptly resolve any issues. Some brief background. The network formed in 2011 to help support and advance the growing field of collaborative landscape conservation. We work to connect landscape conservation practitioners to the best resources, tools, and to each other so that we continue to learn from one another and innovate in the field. Our geographically diverse 35-person leadership team has representatives from the nonprofit, academic, private landowner, tribal, and state and federal agency communities in the US, Canada, and Mexico. The network is a fiscally sponsored project of the Center for Large Landscape Conservation in Bozeman, Montana, who works with us on fund implementation and also administers the fund. Our website highlights a number of resources and initiatives that you may find helpful in your work, including our bi-monthly e-bulletin, a free news aggregating service that highlights news and trends in the field, as well as upcoming conferences, events, and other opportunities. We also have a survey we conducted of landscape conservation initiatives in 2017 that highlights a number of important trends in the field. And our Pathways Forward report captures the strategic thinking, inspired case studies, and recent innovations in the field from the National Forum on Landscape Conservation in 2017. Both of these reports capture a fundamental and rapid shift in conservation. People are increasingly working together at the larger landscape scale, the scale nature functions, and people are working collaboratively in community-grounded partnerships to do so. This is the linchpin of effective landscape scale conservation. But such collaboration takes considerable time and effort and dedicated funding for that collaborative process, for building enduring and effective partnerships step by step. The purpose of the Catalyst Fund is to address that central need. The fund is designed to accelerate the pace of conservation at scale across the United States through targeted support of collaborative landscape conservation. Specifically, the fund supports key collaborative processes and activities to build critical capacity and forward momentum in landscape conservation partnerships. The Catalyst Fund is made possible through the generous support of the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. The Catalyst Fund is one of multiple regrant programs that the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation invests in to sustain our landscapes in the face of a changing climate. The suite of Doris Duke's regrant programs can be viewed through this link on your screen, and you may find some that fits your needs as well. The Catalyst Fund identifies 3 priorities that all applicants must meet. We prioritize investments in landscape conservation partnership and partnerships that are in the building stage of development, and partnerships working on capacity building and advancing the collaborative process. A portion of the fund is also reserved specifically for Indigenous-led partnerships that work to advance Indigenous landscape conservation priorities. These partnerships may apply through that reserved application process. We will now walk through each of these priorities, one at a time. First, we recognize that there's a wide spectrum of landscape conservation initiatives emerging and underway across the country, and not all initiatives, regardless of their relevance or value, will meet the Landscape Conservation Partnership definition of the Catalyst Fund. But for the purpose of this fund, we're defining landscape conservation partnerships as place-based, focus on a shared long-term conservation vision, collaboratively governed, inclusive, and informed. A detailed definition of each of these bullet points is provided in the RFP. We also strongly encourage you to review Section 3 of the applicant guidance document, where we present an in-depth exploration of this definition and what will and will not meet its standard. The applicant guidance document is new this year. It supplements the RFP by providing additional background and guidance on whether you will be a good fit for the fund and how to craft a strong proposal. We highly recommend that you read it carefully, in addition to the RFP itself. Our second priority is to be in the building stage of partnership development. Although every partnership will be uniquely shaped by its own people, place, and challenges, analysis of the field suggests that most follow similar progressions of development, which can be generalized as 3 stages: starting, building, and conserving. The fund strategically targets the building stage when partnerships are navigating the transition from collective vision to collective action. We want to see partnerships where people have spent the time to build trust, establish relationships, and develop a vision and goals statement for their shared landscape. The building stage is often the point at which volunteer time of participants is no longer enough to sustain and build the partnership. And this is when funding to advance the collaborative process and specific building block activities will land on fertile ground, solidifying group momentum and accelerating forward progress. Proposals from conserving stage partnerships may be considered only in exceptional situations where the outcomes of the grant period will be of significant value to the broader field. And applicants interested in applying on behalf of a conserving stage partnership should contact us directly before applying. Proposals from partnerships in the starting stage will not be considered. Again, we encourage you to carefully review the applicant guidance document for more background, particularly the partnership stages and common steps to success chart. Our third priority, the fund prioritizes investments in capacity building and the collaborative process with the intent to accelerate a partnership's transition from building to conserving stage activities. This means the fund prioritizes supporting the coordination function of the partnership as well as specific partnership building activities. The fund does not support direct on-the-ground project-specific activities like trail construction costs, land acquisition or easement costs, or direct land management costs. Again, the common steps to success chart may be a helpful reference as you consider what types of activities to include in a proposal. Indigenous-led partnerships must meet the 3 major priorities of the fund just discussed. Plus, They must be clearly led by Indigenous voices and primarily working to advance Indigenous landscape conservation priorities. These partnerships can be focused wholly on sovereign tribal lands and/or focused on advancing and conserving Indigenous interests, territories, and rights across a broader, defined landscape. There is a separate reserved application process for partnerships that meet this priority, and you'll have a choice which application to fill out when you go on our online system. This category also has the option to submit the application via a Word form. This year, we do not have a separate RFP for the Indigenous category. Requirements are throughout the RFP in appropriate sections, but the requirements and guidance on what makes a strong proposal are also summarized in Section 2 of the applicant guidance document, and for convenience, also in a freestanding document that can be downloaded from our website. Partnerships that have an Indigenous component but do not clearly meet this strict definition should apply through the overall application process. We strongly encourage you to carefully review and take into consideration the evaluation criteria in Section 4 of the RFP. In particular, strong proposals will come from partnerships that clearly meet the partnership definition and are squarely in the building stage of development. Strong proposals will also make a compelling case for the catalytic impact of the funding. Applicants can request from $10,000 to $25,000 in total in a 1-year or 2-year proposal. We have an annual grant cycle, but no one grantee is eligible for more than $25,000 total over the first 3 years of the program. Only 501c3 organizations from within the 50 states of the United States are eligible to apply. One exception is that applicants in the American West who are applying for the Indigenous-led partnership portion of the fund can also do so under IRS Code Section 7871. Because most landscape conservation partnerships do not have formal IRS status, an eligible organization may apply on behalf of the partnership. A one-to-one match is required. In-kind support can contribute to this match requirement, but at least 50% of the match must be direct support. One exception is that the match requirement is optional for Indigenous-led partnership applicants. You will also see when you download the budget form that overhead or indirect costs cannot exceed 12% of your budget. Please note the 2020 timeline. We will be accepting pre-proposal submissions through March 13th. Submissions will be handled through our online application portal, and detailed directions are in the RFP. We have copies of the pre-proposal forms posted on our website, so you can review these prior to filling them out in our online system. If you meet the Indigenous-led partnership definition, you will simply select the Indigenous-led partnership application process once you are logged onto our system. And while we prefer all applicants to use our online system, again, Indigenous-led partnerships, if preferred, may submit their pre-proposals using the Word form that's available on our website. A last note, a major component of the Catalyst Fund is a peer learning program for funded partnerships. The field of collaborative landscape conservation is growing rapidly, and the people involved have much to learn from one another. Funded partnerships will be invited to select 1 or 2 representatives to participate in a peer learning cohort that will last the length of the grant period. The program will consist of bi-monthly calls or webinars, as well as an annual in-person convening for peer exchange, training opportunities, and mutual inspiration. Travel funding will be provided for this purpose. We consider this part of the program at least as important as the grants themselves, as it will connect grantees to a community of peers and expertise that will last long after the dollars are spent. So I'd like to thank you all for your patience. We are now going to turn to the questions you submitted before or during this webinar. Thank you again. John?
Great, thank you, Emily. The first question, I've pulled together a series of questions and generalized them under one. So we'll start here, Emily. I see a one-to-one match is required. Can you explain the specifics of this match requirement?
Sure. We ask for one-to-one match, but up to 50% of that minimum match can be in kind. And I see a couple of questions around this. Can the in-kind match come from an organization not designated as a 501c3? The answer to that is yes. Presumably your partnership has a number of actively involved stakeholders who are all working together to move the partnership forward. So if you have community volunteers, local landowners, others who are working as partners, putting in the time, hosting meetings, that can all count as in-kind match. Any additional labor or effort that fuels the partnership and moves it forward is counted towards in-kind match. One person asked, can other grants funded by the Hewlett Foundation be considered as match? Yes. If you have grant monies that are suitable to apply to this project, yes, they could be other Hewlett, other Doris Duke, other foundation monies. One point about match is that the second year grants, if you apply and receive a 2-year grant, the second year of funding will not be distributed until you have shown that you've met your match.
Great, thanks, Emily. A second question, if awarded, what is the disbursement schedule for grants? Are grant funds provided upfront or as a reimbursement?
Great, thank you. So pursuant to the schedule, awards will be announced no later than September 1st, and first-year grants will be distributed as soon as the grant agreement is signed. So presumably no later than September 15th if all the paperwork goes smoothly. So the money is distributed up front. Second-year grants will be distributed as soon as the first-year match has been demonstrated and after the first-year progress report is submitted. We also got a related question. If necessary, can we request 100% of our request be funded next year, 2021? I would say generally, we're very willing to work with you towards a budget that helps you succeed. Given that grant monies wouldn't be distributed until mid-September, latest 1st of October, I think it would be a perfectly fine conversation to say, we'd actually like our grant to run January through December instead of October through the following 12 months. So we're flexible. Our goal is to help you succeed.
Great, thank you, Emily. Another question received during the registration process asked for more background on what is the definition of a partner.
Great, thank you. I also see someone said, do organizations have to provide match funds to be considered a partner? The answer to that is no. Partners in the partnership include those you consider to be your partners. You're the ones building a collaborative partnership. So presumably, they are the people who are actively engaged, people and organizations who are actively engaged and committed, who've signed off on the vision statement, and who are part of the active group working together to move the effort forward. You may have a core group of partners and then an expanded list of involved people or partners. That is really your business to define who your partnership is comprised of.
A similar question, Emily, can you explain more about our definition of a landscape?
Sure. Well, again, I think defining a landscape is really up to the partnership. In our materials, we define it as an interconnected geographic area that exceeds jurisdictional boundaries, yet functions as and is perceived as a single unit because of ecological, cultural, and or other societal reasons. I would also note we see many nested partnerships across landscapes. So example, the North Quabbin Partnership in central Massachusetts is only 500,000 acres, but it's also the southern end of the larger Quabbin to Cardigan Partnership. So you may work in nested landscapes, multiple partnerships. And we also note in our materials that partnerships can occur in all types and mixes of landscapes: urban, suburban, rural, working, wild, and combinations of those.
Great, thanks, Emily. Another question. Can you provide more detail on the statement in the guidance document about single species or ecotypes not being a good fit with this fund?
Sure. The goal of the Catalyst Fund is to support partnerships that are focused on the overall health and future of the landscape. And so a narrow campaign or single issue approach will generally fall short of that. That being said, there are partnerships that use a keystone species or otherwise iconic species as the start to opening up a larger discussion and effort to sustain the landscape overall. So context will be important if you are advocating for a single species effort in your application.
Great, thanks, Emily. A somewhat related question: for Indigenous-led partnerships, can the fund be used to support a collaborative project to restore an endangered species on a tribal landscape, or is the fund more focused toward landscape or habitat protections?
Great. We're very fortunate to have specific funding from the Hewlett Foundation to support Indigenous-led partnerships. Traditional Native American approaches to landscape are already holistic, and we have much to learn from our tribal friends and partners. So we approach this aspect of our fund with respect and with humility. And we recognize that we're using a dominant culture framework that might not be a perfect fit for all tribal needs. So we're open to arguments that there may be both ecological and cultural reasons to focus on a specific species, be it part of the origin story of the tribe, a key sustenance species, or other. So in other words, it's a gray area, but I would recommend that an endangered species approach would need to be put in a strong context of being necessary for a healthy ecologic and or cultural future.
Great, thanks, Emily. We have two more questions from the registration process, and then we're going to turn to some of the questions that are being submitted through the question and answer function on the webinar. I would just encourage folks to continue to do that as we move through these, and we'll get to your questions as we move forward. So the next question, Emily, can funding support a regional summit aimed at building collaboration and innovation among the partners and stakeholders?
Oh, absolutely. An activity of that sort that brings together stakeholders, enhances knowledge, and promotes dialogue would be a suitable use of Catalyst funds.
Great, thanks. Are site visits for landowner outreach and education considered on-the-ground efforts or general outreach?
Once again, I have to say it depends. Yes, of course, partnerships will want to do outreach to landowners and other stakeholders. Small gatherings and meetings will be key, and individual visits may be suitable. But if it starts to look like business as usual land trust outreach regarding conservation easements without an overlay of value-added partnership beyond business as usual, then it will make for a less attractive proposal.
Great. Thanks, Emily. So that's the questions that were submitted through the registration process. Thanks so much for submitting those questions. I'm going to turn now to questions that have come in during the question and answer function on the webinar. First, Emily, just a clarifying question on the match. Must match funds be from a third party, or is it okay if one of the partners matches the funds from its operating budget?
That would be acceptable use of match if it's a cash match going to the partnership.
Great, thank you. Next, we have a question on stages of partnership development and what would distinguish a partnership from being in the building stage versus the conserving stage. This particular partnership may be somewhere in between. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Emily?
Sure, and I didn't go into great detail on the webinar. You'll see that there's quite a bit more information in the applicant guidance document. And one thing we emphasize in that document is that despite our nifty chart and arrow, the progression is not necessarily linear. Partners may be working in multiple stages simultaneously. They may be looping back. You may have a conserving partnership who then loops back to do some building stage activities. And so if you're not sure if you're applying for something that we would consider building or conserving, I would suggest you directly write John so that we can help you as best we can. It's not as clear as we like to make it in our tidy chart, and we'd be happy to have that email conversation with you.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Another question, would you fund a partnership that has received $10 million in funding, or is that too big a partnership for what you're looking for specifically?
I think the catch here is that our grants are $10,000 to $25,000, and we really want them to be catalytic. And many of the partnerships we've looked at and have funded to date are really making that jump from no money or very little money to hiring a coordinator, using $25,000 in a way that's truly transformative for the growth of the partnership. The bigger your budget is, the harder it is to make an argument that $25,000 can be catalytic and that it's not just operational support. So I would suggest that a $10 million partnership is simply way too large for a Catalyst Fund grant.
Great, thanks, Emily. We had a question, if there are examples of ongoing or past partnerships that have been funded and what they have focused on in their grants.
So if you go on our website and you go to the Catalyst Fund page and you look on the left, there's a little index of items you can click on, and we have an annotated list of our first 14 Catalyst Fund grants. You may know that this is the second year of our program, and so those inaugural grants were just awarded in September. And if you look through there, I think it will give you a good idea of what that funding is for and where those grantees are going, and we'll continue to update. As I mentioned, several of them are hiring coordinators, and all of them are embarking on important building block activities to move from collective vision to collective action.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Does our definition of landscape, does landscape include waterways? And in particular, thinking about working with Indigenous communities that do not necessarily break out land conservation as something separate from waterways.
I lost you a little bit there, but I think waterways and watersheds is certainly an appropriate proposal, particularly if a strong connection is made to the overall health of the interconnected landscape. If it's a water, a strict water pollution campaign, really starting to edge away from the purpose of the fund. There are some gray areas there that we recognize. So if you have a specific waterways question, I would encourage you to send a specific email to John so that we can help you sort it through.
Great, thanks, Emily. A handful of questions left, and again, I encourage folks, if you have questions, by all means, please feel free to submit them through the question and answer icon on the webinar. But we have a question about support for an urban museum interested in further developing Native Hawaiian gardens and associated programs and outreach around Hawaiian native species. Would that be an appropriate match for the fund and our priorities?
That would not be a good fit for the Catalyst Fund.
Great. Next question. Would it be appropriate to use this grant to promote a partnership addressing engaging minority landowners across a landscape to bring information, education, and technical assistance to implement conservation and sustainable forestry?
I think that is certainly a possibility. Again, context would be important. Does the partnership already exist? Does it have a conservation vision? And this particular activity is a piece of that overall strategy. But in concept, yes, that would be a suitable application.
Thank you, Emily. Another question, looking for clarity. Native Hawaiians appear to be left out of the Catalyst Fund. Can we have more details to why this is?
I don't believe they're left out, and we did have several Hawaiian proposals before. If we've been awkward with terminology in using the word indigenous instead of natives, I apologize, and I'd be interested to hear from people in terms of what language to use. We're learning as we go, so we appreciate any feedback you can give us.
And I'm just going to jump in, Emily, there too, and hypothesize that might be a reference to our definition of American West, and just share that that's in part a reflection of funding priorities and guidelines from our original funders, but Native Hawaiians are more than encouraged and invited to apply through the Catalyst Fund.
No, that's absolutely right. Our Doris Duke Charitable Foundation monies are national in scope, all 50 states. But not to get into the weeds, they are required to only accept applications from 501c3 organizations. The Hewlett Foundation funds in the American West and also wanted Indigenous applicants to be able to use the 7871 IRS code, which our other funder cannot do. So there's just a little bit of hair splitting there. But Hawaii is very much on our radar screen. And in fact, of our invited full proposals last year, one of them was from Hawaiian Native concern.
Great. Next question, Emily. Can you please confirm that a partnership can be a collaborative effort, not a formally incorporated organization? And if so, can one of the partner organizations be the one that hires the coordinator?
Yes. I would be very surprised if any partnership in the building stage had a 501c3 IRS status. It almost seems, contrary to being in the building stage. And so we try to be very clear in our RFP that we don't expect partnerships to have 501c3 status. Most of them are informal collaboratives, not to mention being quite early in their development. So people can apply as a fiscal sponsor, as the leading or host partner. We specify, various ways that you can choose one organization in your partnership to apply. And then you can choose to spread that money out across your partners who are doing the funded work. You can choose, presumably it would be the person who, the organization who applied, can then be the organization responsible for the staff person you hire with that funding. All of this is exactly what we expect from the Catalyst Fund. And if you have any problems or questions about who should be the lead organization applying, who should be the organization supervising and paying staff, above all, that's a question you should have within your partnership. But if you have any external questions for us, we'd be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you, Emily. A question about national organizations with chapter structure, including chapters that are separate 501c3s. Are these chapters eligible to be considered partners within the Catalyst Fund program?
Yes, of course they are. And you'll notice when you fill out the budget and we ask for the budget of the applicant organization, we specifically say, if you're a big national organization, just give the budget for that chapter that's involved.
Great, thanks, Emily. A question on partnerships and how long a partnership has been around. If a partnership has existed for six years, is this too developed of a partnership, or would it still be a good fit for the grant program?
I think every partnership builds at their own pace, and I think it would be more of a matter of where they are developmentally and budget-wise. Sometimes partnerships can kind of simmer along for several years, and then finally they build the momentum to, really leap forward. And so 6 years is certainly not too old time-wise. The question would be more, where are they structurally and financially?
Great, thank you, Emily. Encourage folks to submit any questions they have. I see one very specific question that I'm going to suggest I'll follow up with after the webinar. But I think I'm scrolling through the questions, Emily, and I think we've covered the ground. I'll just pause and give folks another opportunity to submit any additional questions they have, and encourage folks to do so. Anything that's on your mind, and will help clarify what you're thinking about in terms of pulling the proposal together, and whether it makes sense to pursue this opportunity. We have another question that's come in, Emily. A partnership that's focused on a keystone species across a biodiverse ecotonal landscape, is that going to be an appropriate fit to the Catalyst Fund?
I think it's going to depend on context, and I'm sorry to say that so many times during this webinar, but if there's a specific ecological landscape and there's a partnership focused on that landscape, and their priority focus for the moment is on a specific species as symbolic of the health of the landscape, that could happen. But if a group is formed to protect a large carnivore over an enormous region that's not really a landscape, but it's the southeast or the northwest, that's not a partnership under the definition of the Catalyst Fund. Again, happy to follow up. None of these questions have black and white answers, and we appreciate your staying on the line while we try to give you the best information we can.
Great. We have a request for the Q&A discussion in written form. We're certainly posting the recordings of these webinars on our website, so you'll be able to access them that way. And we'll see about transcribing in written form as well. Any final questions? I'm scrolling through the list, and I think we've covered much of the ground. If you have a question, now would be the time to take a moment to write it in, and we can see if we can get it answered on the webinar.
We also do have an FAQ posted on our website, and what might be efficient is for us to go back to that FAQ and bolster it based on the questions you've asked today, now that we understand where the questions are, where the biggest uncertainties are.
And I would also take this opportunity to mention we have a second webinar scheduled for next Wednesday. If you think of additional questions and want to sit through the same presentation again and get your question answered during that webinar, by all means do so, but also perhaps more appropriate to share with colleagues that haven't been able to join this webinar and want to get a little bit more depth of understanding about the Catalyst Fund and what will or will not be a good fit with it. A final question seems that, Emily, would applications submitted previously but not accepted be welcomed for resubmission?
Yeah, what I would certainly recommend that you look closely at the applicant guidance document and the new RFP, and then if you have any questions about your old proposal, to email us directly. But we did receive 180 pre-proposals last year. We were able to fund 14 proposals, so we did receive a wonderful set of applications that we were not able to fund. So I'll give it some thought and be in touch if you have questions.
Great, thanks, Emily. I'm not seeing any further questions coming in. Oh, we have a final question, actually. How are the RFPs evaluated? I think the question is more about how are the pre-proposals evaluated, especially for Indigenous projects? Is there an advisory committee?
Yes, we have two committees. We have a Catalyst Fund review committee that reviews all of the proposals and also works with us throughout the year to review the fund, update the fund, and we do have Indigenous representation on that review committee. We also have a larger Indigenous advisory group who have been helping us develop and improve this portion of the fund. Some of them also review pre-proposals and work with us sometimes as a group and also one-on-one to give us feedback as we develop these two pieces of the fund in tandem and together. So we have a number of outside advisors.
That's great, Emily. Thank you.
Is the long answer.
Yeah, and I would perhaps just put a point on something Emily said, and the Indigenous Advisory Committee takes the lead in reviewing pre-proposals that come in through the Indigenous-led partnerships reserved application process. So that advisory committee is front and center on that portion of the fund. And also participates in various ways in the other segments of the fund as well. Again, I think we've reached the point where we've covered all questions. Emily, I'll pass it to you for the final slide, perhaps.
Well, thank you, John, and thank all of you for joining us today. We will be posting a recording of this webinar on the Catalyst Fund page of our website. We'll be updating our FAQs to reflect the questions you've posed here. Please email any remaining questions before March 10th to John Peterson. And I'll just close by thanking you again, and we very much look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.